The call came in just after 9 a.m. on a grey, humid Thursday. Deborah Langley, a 42-year-old school librarian, reported her best friend, Hannah Moore, missing. Hannah hadn't shown up for their weekly book club meeting, hadn't answered calls, and her apartment was locked from the inside. Deborah's voice trembled as she spoke to the dispatcher, her concern palpable. Detective Marla Jennings and Officer Luis Ortega arrived at Deborah's modest suburban home within the hour. The house was immaculate, every surface gleaming, the air scented with lemon polish. Deborah, petite with anxious eyes, greeted him at the door, wringing her hands. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I know it might seem overreactive, but Hannah never misses our meetings. It's not like her." Jennings nodded, her gaze sweeping the living room. "We understand, Mom. When was the last time you saw her?" 3 days ago. We had lunch here. She seemed fine, maybe a bit distracted, but nothing unusual. Did she mention any plans? Anyone she was meeting?" Deborah shook her head. "No, nothing." Jennings glanced at Ortega, who was already taking notes. "Mind if we take a look around?" "Of course. Please." They moved through the house, each room as spotless as the last. No signs of struggle, no misplaced items. The kitchen was a model of order. Stainless steel appliances gleaming, countertops bare except for a bowl of fresh fruit. Jennings turned to Deborah. "Do you have any pets?" "No, I'm allergic. Mind if we bring in a canine unit? Sometimes they can pick up on things we can't." "Whatever you need." Within the hour, Officer Karen Mills arrived with Shadow, a seasoned German shepherd trained in cadaver detection. Shadow was calm, methodical, his nose working the air as he moved through the house. He showed no interest in the living room, dining area, or bedrooms. But as they entered the kitchen, Shadow's demeanor changed. He paused, ears perked, then moved toward an old, standalone refrigerator in the corner. It was an older model, cream-colored with a rounded top, out of place among the modern appliances. Shadow sniffed around the base, then sat, his signal for a find. Mills looked at Jennings. "He's alerting." Deborah's face went pale. "What does that mean?" Jennings approached the refrigerator. "Mom, is this unit operational?" Deborah nodded slowly. "It was here when I bought the house. I use it for extra storage, drinks, leftovers. Mind if we take a look inside?" Deborah hesitated, then stepped aside. "Go ahead." Jennings grasped the handle and pulled. The door creaked open, revealing neatly stacked containers, soda cans, and a covered casserole dish. The cold air spilled out, tinged with an odd, metallic scent. Shadow moved closer, sniffing intently at the lower compartment. Mills opened the freezer section. Inside, wrapped in layers of plastic and aluminum foil, was a large, irregularly shaped bundle. Jennings exchanged a glance with Ortega. "We'll need to take this in for analysis." Deborah's voice was barely a whisper. "What is it?" Jennings met her gaze. "We won't know until we examine it. But we need you to come with us to the station for some questions." Deborah nodded, her eyes wide with shock. At the station, forensic analysis confirmed their suspicions. The bundle contained human remains. Later identified as Hannah Moore. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. Under questioning, Deborah maintained her innocence. "I didn't kill her, I swear. I have no idea how she ended up in my freezer." Jennings leaned forward. "Then help us understand. You said she was here 3 days ago for lunch. What happened after that?" Deborah's eyes filled with tears. "We ate, talked about our book club. She left around 2 p.m. I haven't seen her since." "Did anyone else have access to your house?" "No, I live alone. I don't even have a spare key." "Any security cameras? Neighbors who might have seen something?" Deborah shook her head. "No cameras. My neighbors keep to themselves." The investigation deepened. Forensic teams scoured the house, searching for any evidence of a struggle. Any trace of blood? Nothing. The house was pristine. But then, in the garage, behind a stack of boxes, they found a blood-stained hammer. DNA matched Hannah's. Confronted with the evidence, Deborah broke down. "I didn't mean to." We argued. She said she was moving away, leaving everything behind. I was angry, scared of losing her. I grabbed the hammer. I don't remember what happened next." Jennings remained silent, letting the confession settle. "I panicked." Deborah continued. "I didn't know what to do. I wrapped her up, put her in the freezer. I thought I could fix it somehow." Jennings finally spoke. "Deborah Langley, you're under arrest for the murder of Hannah Moore." The trial was swift. Deborah pled guilty, expressing deep remorse. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. In the quiet suburban neighborhood, the house stood empty, a silent testament to a friendship gone tragically awry. And in the police department, Shadow received a commendation for his role in uncovering the truth hidden within the innocent kitchen. Nothing inside. Detective Jennings stood beside the open refrigerator, brows furrowed. The light inside flickered softly, casting a yellow hue on rows of neatly stacked produce and ordinary groceries: carrots, spinach, a block of cheddar, a jar of mayonnaise. There was no blood, no strange odors, just the faint scent of cooled plastic and celery. Yet Shadow, the K9, wouldn't stop growling. Officer Mills tightened her grip on the leash as Shadow's ears flattened. Nose pressed hard against the lower door seam. He began to scratch and paw at the refrigerator's base, each motion more frantic than the last. "Easy, boy," Mills murmured, though her tone betrayed her unease. Deborah stood a few feet back, arms loosely crossed, her posture oddly relaxed. A strange smile played at the corners of her lips. "It's just an old fridge," she said, voice calm, almost amused. "Shadow's probably picking up something weird from the motor. He's mistaken. Dogs can be wrong, can't they?" Jennings shot her a quick look, then turned back to the fridge. She crouched down, inspecting the door gasket and seams. Everything looked normal. She opened the freezer again. Frozen peas, ice trays, a bag of fish fillets. Still nothing. Maybe the compressor's giving off some kind of scent. Ortega offered quietly. Jennings didn't answer. Her instincts told her something was off. But instincts weren't evidence. Deborah tilted her head slightly. "If it helps, you can take everything out and look deeper." "I don't mind." "But I think you'll find it's just groceries." Jennings hesitated. The house was clean. The dog was the only one insisting otherwise. And without any probable cause beyond the animal's behavior. They couldn't justify tearing apart a private appliance without a warrant. She stood up slowly, dusting off her palms. "It's fine for now. We'll take this into account. Officer Mills, let's wrap it up." Shadow let out a low growl of protest, pulling back against the leash as Mills gently tugged him away. His eyes stayed locked on the refrigerator. "Good boy," Mills whispered. "We'll keep an eye on it." They filed out of the house, Deborah seeing him off with a soft thank you and that same unreadable smile. Shadow was the last to exit. But just before he stepped through the threshold, he stopped. He turned back toward the kitchen, muscles tense. Then he barked, a long, deep, echoing sound that seemed to vibrate through the tiled floor and down into the foundation. A sound that, for a brief moment, made even Officer Ortega pause and glance back over his shoulder. Back at the precinct, Jennings replayed the day's events in her head. Something about the refrigerator gnawed at her. Shadow's training was impeccable. He had found bodies hidden under floorboards, in shallow graves, even dismembered remains submerged in ponds. He didn't alert unless there was a reason. She ordered a follow-up, a thermal scan of the house. But by the time a tech team arrived 2 days later, Deborah had already replaced the refrigerator. "It broke down," she explained, handing him the receipt for a new model. "I figured it was time for an upgrade." Jennings narrowed her eyes. Convenient timing. Still, the house remained spotless. The new fridge gave off no suspicious readings. The tech team left empty-handed. Shadow, however, continued to behave strangely. Back at the kennel, he was restless, pacing near the door, barking at unseen things. Officer Mills had to request temporary reassignment. He was becoming too agitated for regular duty. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that things took a darker turn. A neighbor, Mr. Kenley, called the police to report a terrible smell coming from the storm drain at the end of the block. When sanitation workers opened the grate, they found a bundle wrapped in black plastic, partially decomposed. DNA tests would later confirm the identity: Hannah Moore. Her body had been moved. Jennings returned to Deborah's home with a search warrant. The new fridge was opened. Tested. Nothing. But in the crawl space beneath the kitchen floor, behind a false wall of insulation, they found remnants of a tarp, stained with fluids, and nearby, an old freezer coil wrapped in plastic and duct tape, cut out from the old refrigerator before it was discarded. Jennings stared at the makeshift cover-up. Her jaw tight. She gutted the damn thing. She muttered, hid the evidence, then threw it away like yesterday's trash. The question now wasn't if Deborah had done something, but how she had almost gotten away with it. When they brought her in for questioning again, Deborah remained calm. Her demeanor was serene, even cooperative. "Yes," she said, "I cleaned. I panicked. I didn't know what to do." "Why hide her there?" Jennings asked. "Why in your own fridge?" Deborah's eyes glinted. "I thought it was poetic. We used to cook together, make casseroles, laugh over wine." Jennings leaned in. You knew Shadow would smell her. Deborah shrugged. He was a good dog. Just a little too smart. There was no remorse in her tone. Only a chilling honesty. In court, the prosecution detailed the chilling sequence of events. Deborah and Hannah had argued in a moment of rage. Deborah had struck her with a cast iron pan. The body was temporarily hidden in the refrigerator while Deborah figured out her next move. When Shadow raised suspicion, she dismantled the evidence, dumped the body into the storm drain, and replaced the fridge, all within 48 hours. She was sentenced to life without parole. Shadow returned to duty a month later. Calmer, but forever changed. Sometimes, Officer Mills said, he still paused in front of old refrigerators on house calls, sniffing cautiously, just in case. Because sometimes, there really was something inside. Even when it looked like nothing. Officer Daniel Reyes was only 2 years into the force. Fresh out of academy training. Eager and often dismissed as the kid by older officers. But something about that house, that dog, and that damned refrigerator stuck with him. He remembered Shadow's growl, the way the normally disciplined canine had refused to leave. That bark, long, guttural, warning. It echoed in Daniel's mind every night since. When the team left the house that day, everyone chalked it up to a false alarm. But Reyes couldn't. While the department moved on after the body was discovered elsewhere and the case wrapped up, Reyes started reading the report again. Something didn't add up. The replacement fridge, the perfectly clean kitchen, the tight timeline between Shadow's alert and the discovery of the body, all too convenient. He'd bet his badge that something had been hidden inside that refrigerator. Something more than just food. And if there was one thing his mentor had taught him, it was this: never ignore a working dog. 2 weeks after Deborah's arrest, Reyes requested a supplementary search warrant under the pretense of confirming the fridge model for property documentation. It was a long shot, but his hunch was eating him alive. When the warrant was granted, he returned to the house alone. The property had been sealed off pending resale. The new fridge sat cold and empty. The old one, he had traced to a county salvage lot where discarded appliances were sent for scrap. Reyes drove there in a department truck, his badge tucked tightly to his chest. He walked through rows of washing machines and ovens until he found it, cream-colored. Heavy, rust curling at the edges of the door. The label matched the serial number from the original report. He unscrewed the back panel with borrowed tools. It came off with a reluctant groan, revealing dust, wires, and old insulation, but one part looked newer. An unusual section of metal had been bolted across a lower panel, cleaner than the rest. The screws were different, shinier. Reyes' pulse quickened. He pried it open. Behind the panel was a cavity, a hollowed-out compartment nestled between the coils. Someone had used a drill to cut into the refrigerator wall and created a hidden storage space. Lined with foil and what looked like old rubber gasket. It was sealed crudely but intentionally. Inside, he found a long strand of dark hair, tangled and matted, stuck to something tacky, a small, blood-stained fragment of what appeared to be a fingernail, painted pink, with a glittery finish. A nauseating chemical scent that made Reyes recoil. Bleach. Overwhelming and recent. He stepped back, breath shaky. This wasn't food storage. This was concealment. Carefully bagging the evidence. Reyes called it in. Forensics confirmed what he suspected. The blood matched Hannah Moore. The hair and nail were consistent with her appearance. And the compartment, hidden inside an everyday appliance, was a calculated move. A last-ditch effort by Deborah to stall discovery long enough to dispose of the body. At the department, Reyes presented his findings to Detective Jennings. She stared at the photos in silence. Lips pursed. "You were right," she said finally. "She didn't just hide the body. She planned it. This," she tapped the image of the hidden panel, "isn't panic. This is premeditation." Reyes felt a grim pride. But something still didn't sit right. "Why keep the hair and the nail?" he asked. "Why not burn it all? Toss it with the rest?" Jennings leaned back. Maybe she couldn't let go. Or maybe she thought she'd never be found out. People like Deborah, they hide behind order. Control. She probably thought no one would question her. Reyes nodded slowly, but the question lingered. Some part of Deborah had wanted to hold onto the evidence, trophies. Maybe reminders of what she'd done. Or warnings to herself. In court, the new evidence was submitted during the sentencing hearing. It was no longer just a case of emotional rage and accidental murder. The compartment inside the fridge painted a clearer, more sinister picture: premeditated concealment and an intent to deceive investigators from the start. The judge remarked that it was an attempt so calculated. It bordered on the pathological. Deborah, facing a life sentence, remained silent through the proceedings. She showed no emotion, not even when the photos of the hair and fingernail were displayed. But as she was led out of the courtroom, she paused and turned to Reyes in the gallery. "You should have let it go," she said, voice low, eyes sharp. "Some doors aren't meant to be opened." Reyes didn't flinch. He met her gaze and said, "And some refrigerators aren't just for leftovers." Shadow was given a commendation for his role in alerting the department to the hidden clues. Despite the initial dismissal, the department issued a new training memo reminding officers that even the most subtle alerts from a K9 must be respected, especially when they defy logic. And Reyes. He was no longer the kid. He'd cracked the part of the case everyone else had missed. But he couldn't quite shake the feeling Deborah's warning carried a second meaning. Something deeper, something he hadn't yet understood. At night, he sometimes dreamed of the house, of the kitchen, and always, of that echoing bark. The deeper Detective Marla Jennings and Officer Daniel Reyes dug into Deborah Langley's background. The stranger the puzzle became. Until recently, her records painted a bland portrait: school librarian, book club enthusiast, soft-spoken neighbor. But the sudden ferocity of her crime and her eerie composure in the aftermath didn't sit right with either of them. Then Reyes unearthed something buried under a sealed HR report from a hospital database. Deborah Langley was not just a librarian. 10 years ago, she was Dr. Deborah Langley. a forensic pathologist with a sterling record. She'd worked at 2 major hospitals and consulted for police departments across the state. Her specialty: autopsies, forensic refrigeration systems, and toxicology. Jennings stared at the file, stunned. Why wasn't this in the original background check? Reyes scrolled through the pages. She legally changed her profession on public records after she resigned. Used a court-sealed petition citing psychological trauma following professional burnout. Jennings leaned back. So she went from working with corpses to cataloging library books. That's quite the pivot. But there was more. Reyes continued. The refrigerator we found. It's not a regular consumer model. It's an industrial-grade forensic cold chamber, used to preserve organ samples and cadavers. She retrofitted it to look like a household appliance. Hid its wiring, coated it in domestic paint. Jennings exhaled slowly. She brought her work home with her. The discovery changed the investigation's tone. It wasn't just about a murder anymore. It was about a plan orchestrated by someone who understood death, decomposition, and evidence concealment better than most criminals ever could. The forensic team returned to the salvage lot with new instructions. Inside the stripped-down remains of the refrigerator, they found trace amounts of a rarely used fixative chemical, something only used in high-level medical preservation. The coil system, though crudely patched, had been capable of flash-freezing tissue. Not a coincidence. Deborah hadn't just killed Hannah. She had preserved her, temporarily, knowing it would slow decomposition and confuse time-of-death estimations. But the story wasn't over yet. Reviewing hours of neighborhood surveillance footage from the night of the last dinner, Reyes spotted something strange. Around 10:15 p.m., a woman was seen leaving Deborah's home and walking to a nearby all-night grocery. The figure wore a hoodie and moved quickly, with her head down. At first glance, she looked like Hannah, but frame-by-frame enhancement revealed a subtle inconsistency: her gait, her hands, the eyes when she briefly looked up, and tucked beneath the hood was a hairline slightly off. Jennings squinted at the image. That's not Hannah. That's Deborah, wearing a wig. Further footage showed her entering the store, buying basic groceries, and leaving. Quiet, uneventful, but when compared with known footage of Hannah, the physical differences were undeniable. Deborah had gone out deliberately disguised. They pulled in the wig found at her home, underneath the synthetic strands. Forensic analysis found makeup residue and a single eyelash. DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Deborah. But why dress as Hannah? Reyes asked. Jennings said, she wanted to build a false trail. Make it seem like Hannah was alive after she left Deborah's home. Create the illusion of her being seen in public alone. It's misdirection. And then the final piece fell into place. The toxicology report on Hannah's body had initially been inconclusive due to the level of preservation. But under new scrutiny, traces of succinylcholine were found, a powerful muscle relaxant that causes paralysis and death in minutes. It breaks down quickly in the bloodstream and is notoriously difficult to trace. Only someone with medical knowledge could have administered it without leaving clear evidence. The autopsy team now confirmed that the cause of death was an injection of succinylcholine. The puncture wound had been small, precise, and nearly invisible beneath the hairline at the base of the skull. The estimated time of death? Between 8:30 and 9 p.m. The same evening Deborah claimed they'd had dinner together. Deborah was brought back in for questioning. She sat across from Jennings and Reyes. Hands folded, serene as ever. "You were a forensic pathologist," Jennings began. "You didn't just panic. You knew exactly what you were doing. The refrigerator, the cleaning, the chemicals, the timing. It was all planned." Deborah's gaze was unwavering. "You're very perceptive, detective. You wore a wig to the store that night," Reyes added, "to make it seem like Hannah was still alive. I had errands to run." "You injected her with succinylcholine," Jennings said flatly. "You killed her without a sound. Then preserved the body using a modified forensic fridge. Then you played the grieving friend." Deborah smiled faintly. "Grief wears many masks." Jennings leaned forward. Why go through all this?" Deborah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Because she was going to leave. Move to another city. Start a new life. She was the only constant I had left." Reyes shook his head. "You didn't love her. You wanted to possess her." Deborah didn't deny it. "And you're sure you found everything?" Jennings narrowed her eyes. "What does that mean?" But Deborah only smiled again. The case was airtight now. The trial ended swiftly with the jury delivering a unanimous verdict of guilty on all counts: premeditated murder, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and impersonation. As the court officers led her away for the final time, Deborah turned once more to the gallery, where Shadow, retired from active duty but present as a guest, sat quietly beside Officer Mills. "Smart dog," she said, "but even smarter humans." No one spoke, but Shadow let out a single bark. Low, final, a sound like the closing of a door. Deborah's house was demolished 3 months later. Nothing else was found in the wreckage. And yet, Reyes would never forget the feeling he got every time he stepped into that kitchen. The fridge was gone. The floor had been swept clean. But even in the silence, the cold remained, not in temperature, but in spirit. A secret frozen in time. A warning never to ignore the quiet ones. The courtroom was silent as Deborah Langley was declared guilty. Her expression never changed. No tears. No pleading. Not even a flinch. The jury, shaken by the details of the crime, struggled to understand how someone so seemingly quiet, so ordinary, had orchestrated such horror. It was during her final interrogation, a quiet room with just Detective Marla Jennings and Officer Daniel Reyes present, that she spoke the words that left the room ice cold. "Why?" Jennings asked, voice calm, trying to reach the sliver of humanity she still hoped existed within Deborah. Deborah looked up with a faint smile. Her voice was soft, almost gentle. "She took my husband," she said simply. "I just took back what was mine." Jennings stiffened. "Hannah and your ex-husband?" "She was the reason he left. They met at a conference. He told me one night. Said it was over, just like that. After everything we'd built. After the years I spent supporting his career. I was just discarded. So you murdered her? I reclaimed balance. Deborah replied. I gave her a peaceful end. She didn't suffer. I knew how to do it right. Reyes exchanged a glance with Jennings. The woman sitting across from them didn't resemble someone overwhelmed by grief or rage. Deborah spoke with clarity, with precision. She believed every word she said. And that made her all the more dangerous. Outside the courthouse, as Deborah was led in handcuffs toward the waiting transport van, media lights flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked. Shadow stood with Officer Mills, watching silently. Then, as Deborah stepped past, he barked. Loud, sharp, final. Everyone froze for a split second, until Deborah paused mid-step. Turning her head ever so slightly, an almost imperceptible smile brushing her lips. Jennings's heart dropped. She'd seen that look before. Instinct kicked in. She turned to Reyes. "Something's not right," she said. "That bark wasn't about scent. It was instinct." "What do you mean?" "Shadow knows something's still here." Without waiting for clearance, they raced back to the house. Though the property had been previously cleared and was awaiting demolition, Jennings pulled rank and had the entry unsealed. They went directly to the basement. Dust floated in the stale air. Boxes lined the walls. Tools, furniture, old books. Jennings ran her hand along the cement wall. "There's something else here." Shadow sniffed the air, paced a few steps, then scratched near a false panel at the far end of the room. His tail stiffened. Reyes pried the panel loose, and behind it, a small storage nook. Inside were two weathered suitcases. Heavy, padlocked. They forced them open. Inside each was a bundle wrapped in tarp and duct tape. The smell was unmistakable. Bones. Human remains. Further forensic analysis revealed a horrifying truth. The skeletons belonged to two women who had been reported missing years ago, neither ever linked to Deborah. One had been a visiting medical technician. The other, a neighbor who vanished while walking her dog. Deborah had never been a first-time killer. She had been practicing. The revelation sent shockwaves through the department. What they had thought was a tragic, singular act of revenge turned out to be part of a much darker pattern. The FBI stepped in, opening a full investigation. They re-examined missing persons cases near Deborah's past places of residence, where she had worked as a forensic pathologist. At least 5 other unsolved cases bore chilling similarities. Victims vanishing without a trace. No struggle. No suspects. Always women. Always alone. Always overlooked. Jennings sat at her desk late one night, reviewing the case files again. Deborah had used her knowledge of death to become invisible. She had hidden in plain sight, among libraries and book clubs. Among casseroles and quiet smiles. "I don't think she ever felt betrayed," Jennings said aloud to Reyes. "That was just her excuse." Reyes nodded grimly. "She wanted control. She liked playing God." Jennings tapped the edge of her desk. "And she would have kept going if not for Shadow." At that, Reyes smiled. "Smart dog." "No," Jennings corrected, looking out the window toward the K9 unit kennel. hero. The media dubbed Deborah the icy widow. Her trial for the additional murders led to multiple life sentences without parole. She remained eerily calm throughout, never once denying what she had done. She even wrote a letter to Jennings, thanking her for understanding the design. Jennings burned it. Shadow was retired with honors. A plaque with his name was mounted at the department entrance. Beneath the words, "The truth sometimes hides behind silence. He knew before we did." He lived out the rest of his days with Officer Mills, often laying by the kitchen door, tail twitching whenever someone opened the fridge. Because sometimes, instinct is louder than evidence. And sometimes, a single bark can unearth the darkest secrets.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, please comment 1. And if you didn't, just hit like. See you in the next videos.